Imagine a leader whose mere command can wipe out millions of lives, not only human lives, but also those of innocent sparrows, unleashing an ecological apocalypse with nightmarish consequences. How could one man with such an absolute vision of power lead an entire nation to destroy not only itself, but its very ecosystem? What we are about to tell you is not just a story, but a journey into the darkest and most paradoxical side of Mao Zedong's power, a power that at times seemed to defy all logic and common sense with simply devastating results. Today, we will guide you through two emblematic events in 20th century Chinese history: the collective madness of the Cultural Revolution and the absurdity of the War on the Sparrows, an undertaking that incredibly forever changed the face of a nation. Prepare to explore how the purest ideological faith, when taken to the extreme, can turn into the blindest destruction, revealing the madness of a leader who believed he could rewrite the laws of nature and society at will. The name Mao Zedong conjures up powerful images: the great helmsman, the founder of the People's Republic of China, the architect of a revolution that changed the world. But behind the facade of the charismatic revolutionary lurked a power so vast that it could bend not only the will of hundreds of millions of people, but even the dynamics of nature itself. It was a power that brooked no criticism, tolerated no deviation, and above all recognized no limits. A paradoxical power because it promised a future of equality and prosperity, but too often led to unprecedented destruction, both physical and moral. The paradox lies precisely here: the promise of a communist paradise often translated into a hell on earth for millions of people. His leadership was a melting pot of ideology, ambition, and an unshakable belief in his own infallibility. This explosive mix gave rise to campaigns that still astound us today with their scale and unimaginable consequences. We are talking about a leadership that did not hesitate to sacrifice entire generations, millions of lives, on the altar of an idea, a principle, a vision. These events are not simply pages in a history book, they are deep scars in the soul of a nation, testimonies to how fanaticism can cloud reason and lead to tragedies of biblical proportions. Two of these tragedies in particular show us the true nature of this power: the Cultural Revolution and the surreal War on the Sparrows. Both, in their own way, represent the pinnacle of ideological madness and its devastating practical application, revealing a side of power that is both fascinating and terrifying. Imagine an entire nation being thrown into chaos overnight by a single man. In 1966, Mao Zedong, feeling threatened by his rivals within the Communist Party and convinced that the country was sliding toward bourgeois revisionism, launched what he called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. It was not a revolution in the traditional sense of the term, with weapons and pitched battles, but an ideological purge, a real civil war fought in mines and in the streets, unleashing an unprecedented social frenzy. The stated goal was to destroy the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. But the real goal was to reassert Mao's absolute authority and dismantle anyone who might oppose him. China, overnight, was transformed into a gigantic stage for the worship of Mao's personality. His quotes, collected in the famous Little Red Book, became a sort of gospel to be read, recited, and venerated daily. In the cities, especially in Beijing, huge crowds gathered to celebrate the great helmsman. We are not talking about small demonstrations. Millions of people, often young students, filled the squares, waving their little red books, shouting slogans, and singing hymns to Mao. Propaganda was widespread. Every street, every house, every school, every factory was adorned with giant portraits of Mao and posters extolling his genius. The cult of his figure was so pervasive that it permeated every aspect of daily life, from politics to art, from music to education. You couldn't escape Mao's image, his voice, his words. He was omnipresent, omnipotent. And then there were the Red Guards. They were student and youth militias, often enthusiastic and ideologically blinded adolescents, armed not only with the Little Red Book, but also with clubs, sticks, and blind ferocity. Mao openly encouraged them to bomb the headquarters, that is, to expose and attack supposed enemies of the people within the party, the government, schools, and families. And they did. The Red Guards spread terror and destruction far and wide. Professors, intellectuals, artists, bureaucrats, anyone suspected of having bourgeois ideas or being a revisionist was dragged from their homes, publicly humiliated with donkey hats and signs around their necks, beaten, tortured, and in many cases killed. The Red Guards destroyed ancient temples, libraries, works of art, everything that represented China's old culture, in an iconoclastic frenzy that erased centuries of history. Entire neighborhoods were looted, homes destroyed, families torn apart. The social order collapsed completely. Ideological violence spread, encouraged from above, and transformed neighbors into informers, friends into enemies, children into accusers of their parents. Millions of people were persecuted, subjected to purges, and sent to re education camps in the most remote countryside, in what was called re education through labor. Estimates speak of millions of people dying as a result of the Cultural Revolution, including executions, induced suicides, torture, and starvation in the camps. All this in the name of communist purity, an ideal that, in the hands of an uncontrolled power, transformed into a monster capable of devouring its own children. The Cultural Revolution was a decade of madness, a dark period when reason was silenced by rhetoric and humanity was trampled upon in the name of a distorted utopia. But the absurdity of Mao's power wasn't only manifested through political and social violence. At times, it took on such bizarre forms that it would seem unbelievable were it not for the fact that they actually happened. In 1958, as China embarked on the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious but unsuccessful plan for forced industrialization and agricultural collectivization, Mao Zedong had a brilliant idea, he said. This plan, which was to transform China from an agricultural nation to an industrial powerhouse in a few years, was already a colossal and risky undertaking, based on unrealistic goals and disastrous planning. And it was precisely in this context that the War on the Sparrows was born, one of the most short sighted and disastrous decisions in environmental history. Mao, in his infinite wisdom, was convinced that sparrows were true enemies of the people, parasites that consumed too much grain, stealing it from the farmers and consequently from the nation. He calculated with his own logic that each sparrow ate about 4.5 kilos of grain per year. Multiplied by the millions of sparrows in China, this represented a huge loss to the crops. Mao's solution? Simple, exterminate them all. And so, the order to completely eliminate the sparrows was given to the entire Chinese population, an order that, like every dictate of the great helmsman, was incontestable. The mobilization was immediate and total, a veritable national crusade. Millions of Chinese, from children to the elderly, were mobilized in what became known as the War on the Sparrows, Condestauer, or more correctly, the Four Pests campaign, which also included mice, mosquitoes, and flies, but sparrows were the main target. For days on end, and sometimes weeks, people took to the streets, fields, rooftops, armed with pots, pans, drums, whistles, bells, and anything else that could make noise. The goal was to create an incessant din, a wall of deafening noise that would prevent the sparrows from landing. Sparrows, in fact, need to rest every 15 minutes or so. If they couldn't land, they had to keep flying until they were exhausted and died. It was a surreal spectacle, an entire nation banging pots and pans in unison, in a deafening cacophony that continued for hours, days. The sparrows fell from the sky, exhausted, or were hunted, killed, their eggs destroyed. The population was proud of their victory over the small birds. Pictures from the time show piles of sparrow carcasses, a symbol of human triumph over nature. But the victory was Pyrrhic, and the disastrous consequences were not long in coming. By eliminating sparrows, China had eliminated one of the most important natural predators of insects, particularly locusts. With sparrows nearly extinct, locusts found themselves without natural enemies and multiplied out of control in an uncontrolled population explosion. Gigantic swarms of locusts descended on the fields, devouring everything in their path. Crops were destroyed on a scale never seen before. The flawed agricultural policies of the Great Leap Forward, which included close planting and unrealistic crop management, had already severely strained Chinese agriculture. Industrial production, based on backyard furnaces that produced poor quality, unusable iron, was also a colossal failure. The war on the sparrows was the straw that broke the camel's back, worsening an already precarious situation and leading to an unprecedented ecological and food collapse. The result was one of the worst famines in human history. Between 1959 and 1961, China was gripped by atrocious hunger. Estimates vary, but tens of millions of people died of starvation. Some sources put the death toll at between 15 and 45 million. Entire villages were wiped out, people ate grass, roots, even tree bark. There were cases of cannibalism driven by the blackest desperation. This catastrophe was not caused only by drought or natural disasters, as people often tried to make people believe, but it was largely the direct product of short sighted and arrogant human policies, dictated by a leader who believed he could bend nature to his will. The one war on the sparrows became the symbol of the short sightedness of those in power, a decision based on distorted logic and a dramatic ignorance of ecological laws. He embodied the arrogance of a leader who, blinded by his own ideology and the belief that he was infallible, ignored every warning and brought his people to the brink of disaster. The cruelest paradox is that precisely this geometric and incontestable order of the leader, designed to improve the lives of the people and increase food production, caused the greatest famine in history and led to destruction and chaos on an unimaginable scale. Eventually, the Chinese government was forced to make an embarrassing backtrack, and sparrows were removed from the four pests list, being replaced by bedbugs. It even came to the point of having to import sparrows from the Soviet Union to re-establish a certain ecological balance. But the damage was done. The lives lost were irretrievable, and the lesson, bitter as it was, had been learned at unspeakable cost. The Cultural Revolution and the War on the Sparrows are not just chapters in a history book. They are powerful warnings about the nature of absolute power. Mao Zedong's leadership, exercised with almost divine authority, dragged China into a spiral of violence, suffering, and disaster that would forever scar its people and its landscape. These events chillingly demonstrate how power, when unbridled, devoid of discernment, and consumed by ideology, can transform not only into an unparalleled destructive force for humanity, but also for the delicate balance of nature itself. They remind us that even the noblest intentions, when interpreted through the distorted lens of fanaticism and personal infallibility, can lead to unimaginable consequences. The story of Mao and China during that period is a constant reminder that every decision, every order of a leader carries immense weight and can shape or destroy the destiny of millions. If this journey through the darkest corners of history has captivated you, subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming insights.